Hi everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Morning Money's interview series, Money Minds. In today's episode, we have with us an individual representing a company that has captivated local markets for over 3 decades. From entrepreneurial beginnings to a leading multinational in paints, coating, and surface solutions, JAT Holdings has indeed come a long way. I am pleased to welcome JAT Holdings CEO Nishal Ferdinando on today's episode.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. Before diving into the specifics of today's conversation, could you please give us a walkthrough of the company's journey as a 100% Sri Lankan brand?
Right. So JAT Holdings was incorporated in 1993, and we entered the market into wood coatings. Right. So gradually, over a certain period, we became the most innovative and trusted brand in wood coatings, representing Sealak. So Sealak is actually the number one in water-based wood coatings, and they had the patent of introducing water-based wood coatings to the world. So we were the company that brought Sealak to South Asia, that is Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, and through that we actually became number one in this part of the world. So at the moment we are number one in Sri Lanka with about a 56% market share. We are number one in Maldives with about a 30% market share, and again number one in Bangladesh with about a 35 to 40% market share in the industry. So then thereafter, we were distributor for Sealak, and over the years we became Sealak's number one distributor in the world. Right? We outgrew countries or distributors such as Russia and other parts of Europe, and we became the number one. I think for over 3 to 4 years we maintained that, and thereafter it was more of a partnership rather than a distribution. So with that, we started bringing their concentrated down, and we started manufacturing it here, and we set up our own manufacturing plant in Sri Lanka. Thereafter, we moved into emulsion paints, we moved into brushes. We have a separate division that does furnishing, and the most recent division is the electric vehicle charging division. And thereafter, in 2021, we went on IPO and we listed. And one of the promises in the listing was to set up a manufacturing plant in Bangladesh. So by 2022, we set up a manufacturing plant in Bangladesh as well. So we backward vertically integrated from a distributor first to a manufacturer, and we horizontally integrated with wood coatings, paint, and paint brushes. Thereafter, I think in 2023, 2024, we further vertically backward integrated in manufacturing the raw materials for the paint. So today we not only manufacture paint, we manufacture the main raw materials. One is the binder for water base, and one is the alkyd resin for solvent base. So one plant we have in Bangladesh, one plant we have in Sri Lanka. So that has been the journey right throughout in order to be one of the prominent paint manufacturers or wood coating manufacturers in South Asia. Right? And now not only South Asia, we have moved to Africa. We have a processing plant in Kenya, and we also, our furnishing division, we have one showroom in Australia. So we have made certain footprints across the globe in a certain way and expanding into different continents. So while doing all of that, we are in the top 100 listed companies. We are in the top 100 most respected companies. We were in the top, I think, 20 most awarded companies in Sri Lanka. So like that, there was many accolades which we got. So this has been the journey from 1993 to 2025.
Thank you, Nishal, for that comprehensive walkthrough on JAT's product range and journey over the past 30 years. Now I'd like to jump into the specifics of this conversation. From a business and financial standpoint, what is the projected impact of bringing Miratone into JAT's global portfolio, especially in terms of revenue contribution, market diversification, and market strength?
Right. So the acquisition of Miraton is not a short-term sort of acquisition. It is more a strategic acquisition, and it's more a mid-term acquisition. So what we are looking at the moment, we are in two continents, that is when it comes to paint, Asia and Africa. With Miraton, we get a prominent sort of position because Miraton is New Zealand's number one wood coating, right? So we also get another number one on top of Maldives, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. We get to be New Zealand's number one wood coating. So from a strategic point of view, we are moving very strongly to another continent. And Miraton previously, right? Miraton had certain issues in Australia. They were number one in Australia for a long period of time. They are a 90-year brand in Australia, and I think an 87-year-old company in Australia. But during COVID, due to various mismanagement and maybe wrong decisions, they went into liquidation. So with that, now we have the opportunity to relaunch in Australia because the top of the mind recall is very strong in the industry in Australia. So from a strategic point of view, what we are looking at is consolidate New Zealand, move to Australia, and that we would do probably in the next 6 months. We would launch in Australia and regain that strong foothold that Miraton had in Australia. So in terms of revenue, if you take, in the year 2000, Miraton did 60 million USD, sorry, not USD, 60 million Australian dollars in terms of revenue in Australia. Now that is the same equivalent that JAT is doing today in terms of a total turnover. So that is the potential. That is the potential that we have. So when you take from a revenue per se, yes, of course, it will take some time to get there. But if I give you a projection in the next 2 to 3 years, right, we would look at maybe bringing about 30% of our revenue through this acquisition, right? So, and with that, the growth of our revenue, right? At the moment, the group is at around 13 billion. We are looking at overall from this continent to add another 4 to 5 billion, right? And not only that, now what a paint company needs, or to be a strong paint company, you need R&D and you need a brand. Now by this acquisition, we get a global brand that is accepted worldwide, and it's 90 years and it's a legacy brand. Now with this, we can enter certain other markets like Southeast Asia, we can enter Europe, we can enter US. So once you enter this, we project in the next 3 years that our turnover overall from a 12 billion would be close to a 30 billion through this acquisition and through different organic growths, right? So that is the strategic nature of this acquisition, where a South Asian company acquires a Australian or New Zealand brand, right? So this combination gives us the leeway to really grow our revenue in the next 3 years, right? So that is our plan, because we see opportunities. The launch in Australia is a huge opportunity. Then in New Zealand, Miraton is not present in the exterior wood coating market. Now JAT is the strongest in exterior wood coating market. So through this synergy, if we do our R&D there and if we launch certain products there, through the strong Miraton brand presence and equity they have here in New Zealand, we can launch that as well. So all of these synergies will come into play in order to increase the revenue in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years' time.
And I'd like to ask a follow-up question touching on the synergistic capabilities of both Miraton and JAT.
Right.
What commercial synergies do you expect to unlock by combining JAT's manufacturing scale and R&D capabilities with Miraton's established market knowledge and product capability?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So one thing that Miraton has is brand equity, and their product quality is quite strong in Australia and in New Zealand. Now when we did our due diligence, one thing that we checked was when the company had issues in Australia, whether the product quality had come down. But we found out that the product quality had not come down. It was only the supply chain disruptions that had happened. So what we would see is they have an extremely strong brand equity, but because the company had certain liquidity issues in Australia, they could not really go heavily into R&D, right? And to sort of change with the times in the last probably maybe 5 years, right? But if you take JAT on the other hand, I was speaking about the IPO, and one promise was to manufacture in Bangladesh. Another promise was to set up a state-of-the-art R&D facility in Sri Lanka, which we did. I think we invested about 400 million and we got the best state-of-the-art equipment. Some of the equipment, I don't think any laboratory or paint laboratory in South Asia has it, right? So we have that sort of a, I would say, high-level laboratory in Sri Lanka, plus the professionals, right? We got a lot of professionals from various multinational companies to set up this R&D. We also have certain affiliations with Cal Poly in US and Polytech in Spain, with these universities that also supply R&D. So if you look at JAT, we are in the forefront of R&D, and we have done a lot of new innovations, right? One thing is we were the first South Asian company to introduce a water-based wood coating binder of European standards in entire Asia. And if you take the total number of companies that have the capacity of doing this, it's only 4 in the world. So that's how strong our R&D is. Now, if you picture us coupling this strength with the brand legacy in New Zealand and in Australia, this would do wonders, right? Because that is what they lacked, and that's what that is our strength. Now, if you take what we lack is, we do not have the market knowledge of the conditions in Australia and in New Zealand, but their teams have all of that, right? So when the R&D part comes from us, all we need to do is we need to provide them with certain quality products, certain upscaling of products, and then the market would just really sort of boom, right? So that is one part of it. The second thing is, if you look at from a manufacturing point of view, they manufacture in New Zealand, but the manufacturing in New Zealand is adequate for the New Zealand market. But for Australia, we don't need to actually set up a manufacturing plant in Australia, because we have one in Bangladesh, we have one in Sri Lanka. So as long as we mirror the same quality, which is 100% doable and possible, we could send it from Sri Lanka. And obviously, you know that manufacturing in Sri Lanka is much more cheaper from a labor point of view, from a electricity point of view, right, than Australia, right? So we could utilize this advantage of giving the same quality due to our R&D, but with a manufacturing advantage in South Asia or in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh. So that is another synergy. Then if you look at from a sourcing point of view, we could combine all of the sourcing and have a centralized sourcing system for procurement, and we could reach economies of scale, right? Or we could order more and get bulk discounts, and we could send it there. Another thing is from a human resource point of view, there are certain services, like we'll say designing from a marketing point of view, right, or certain other support services which can be carried out in Sri Lanka for Australia and New Zealand, right? So that would give a cost advantage. Then from our side, if you look, if we want to expand to certain parts of Southeast Asia like Malaysia, Indonesia and all of that, we would have certain foreign resources there who have industrial knowledge who we could utilize to go to these countries. So this sort of the marriage or the synergy here has a lot of, like 1 + 1 becomes not 2, it becomes about 6, right? So that's how much the synergies, if we play our cards right, can really give us an extremely competitive advantage, not only for Miratone in Australia and New Zealand, but for JAT in Sri Lanka with the certain aspects of Miraton.
So, having mentioned from that answer that JAT is an industrial forerunner of R&D within the South Asian region, I'm sure that integration is also part of its ethos. So, I'd like to touch on how integration comes into play in this regard. Integrations often come with both opportunities and costs. What operational efficiencies in supply chain, technology, transfer of production, optimization do you anticipate achieving in the first 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, so I think I touched on some of this question, a certain part of it in the second answer. But in the next 24 months, what you would see is mainly the integration in the R&D, right? Because we will centralize the R&D, where we would be doing a lot of uh, value additions and all of that, a lot of new products or NPDs for New Zealand and Australia, or vice versa for Sri Lanka, right? So the R&D would be one main thing that we would integrate, right? So that would be one, and from, like I told you, from a sourcing point of view, we would do that. So in the next 2 years, what you would see is a huge growth from the Miraton's existing level due to all of this, which will be consolidated 100% to the JAT Holdings P&L, right? So that at the moment, we'll say in rupee terms, if they are doing about 1.5 billion, right? That is on a historical basis. If in the next 2 years we are looking at increasing this almost by double, right? With that, then if we launch in Australia, that would give another maybe 1.5 billion. So that would increase even to about a triple the turnover that they are doing at the moment. So this integration part of it, where R&D would be at the helm of it, sourcing would be there, and also manufacturing would improve their GPs. At the moment, Miraton has a very healthy margin or GP margin of about 45%. That's by manufacturing in Sri Lanka. Now, if we scale it up, we don't need to scale up the manufacturing in New Zealand per se, right? So what we could do is certain of that manufacturing we could do in Sri Lanka, certain parts we could do in New Zealand, certain parts we could do in Bangladesh. So if we can streamline this manufacturing part of it, there also this integration there would give you a added GP. And then I also told you about us manufacturing the raw materials for the paint. We have one water-based acrylic binder plant in Sri Lanka, and we have one alkyd resin plant in Bangladesh. Now, all this time, Miraton has been purchasing the raw material for their products from external parties, from third parties. Now, it can be from our group. Now, when it's from our group, obviously we cut into another person's margin. I also told you that we were the first to develop this the water-based acrylic binder in South Asia. So that has about a 40% GP kept by the other third-party manufacturers, because there is only 4 or 5 manufacturers in the world. Now, when Miraton buys that from us, automatically they would save about 40% on the main raw material for water base, right? And a certain other maybe about 15 to 20% on the solvent base, right? So all of these would add in the first 2 years immediately, because these are the quick things that we can do. Supply binder, do certain manufacturing here. In Australia, we can do bulk of the manufacturing from Sri Lanka, bulk sourcing, right? Better negotiation, all of that, and centralizing R&D to develop certain NPDs and also for certain cost reductions there. So these are what I would see in the next 2 years kicking in.
So, having spoken of integration, I'd also like to touch on the KPIs. What KPIs will define whether this acquisition is creating the financial and strategic values JAT expects?
Right. So again, we have for the next 3 years, we have set KPIs on revenue targets, and we have set, that is the overall top line and overall bottom line, right? So that is set. So we would sort of track it every single year to see whether we have met those targets. Then there are certain targets on GP improvements which we would set as KPIs, which we would see. Plus overall cost reduction for the group is another KPI which we are looking at, right? So, and which we would track again in the next 3 years. Plus, how many new markets do we enter through this acquisition in the next 3 years? So, at the moment we are in about 8 countries, right? So, we are targeting in the next 3 years to be in 20 countries. So, all of a sudden you won't have in the third year 20 countries, right? So, you have to build it on a yearly basis. So, that would also be a KPI as to how much of revenue we are getting from new markets, right? So, those are some of the main KPIs which we would look at in order to ensure that we are on track with this acquisition, and all the financial, qualitative and quantitative benefits come into that we planned, that it can be realized now.
So, having spoken of markets, I'd also like to pose a question with regard to the competition within these markets. What gives you confidence that JAT can capture market share and build a differential position in Australia and beyond?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So, what I feel is, what I always say is, in this acquisition, it is legacy meets vision. Okay, so you have a legacy brand. With JAT, what you get is that vision, you get that energy, you get that typical South Asian corporate trying to be the best, that sort of hunger is what you have. So I think why I'm very confident that we could make it in Australia and better the competition is, one thing is our manufacturing base, right? So we would have a competitive advantage in manufacturing. Second, though we manufacture from here, we would not compromise the quality. Through our R&D, we could match or better the quality. Third thing is innovation, right? We have a 8-quarter plan for certain innovation, for certain new sort of aspects in the wood coating industry to come out, right? So there will be a lot of new technologies which we introduce, and JAT has a lot of connections with Italian companies that are also doing wood coatings, or Italian equipment suppliers for wood coatings, right? And we also represent Sherwin-Williams, that is the world's biggest paint company, right? So they incidentally own Select now, right? So with all of those connections, with all of that, all of the exposure that we get from those markets, we sort of see the future. And sometimes I feel Australia, being a little bit isolated from the rest of the world, sometimes it picks up a little bit late certain technologies, right? So it takes a bit of time for them to change. But now with us, we could be the one who is driving the change in this market, right? So while we have a cost advantage, while we can match the quality or better the quality, we could actually revolutionize the market in Australia, right? So, and from a management point of view as well, I feel that Miratone was a family-owned company, right? And when you run for about 87 years through a family-owned company, there can be certain management issues. But JAT is a listed company which is professionally run. We only take the best professionals to lead the company at various levels. So from a management point of view as well, I feel that we are better equipped to service that market.
And since you also mentioned of global expansion, my next question will also be on that. Global expansion brings exposure to currency fluctuations, supply chain volatility, and geopolitical risk. How is JAT safeguarding profitability while scaling internationally?
Yeah, so when you say safeguarding profitability, I think the best way is the markets that we are in and established and that we are already number one, we maintain that number one position and we actually change them to sort of a cash cow status, right? So if you take Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, these are markets which we have been maybe for the last 20 years, right, which we have been. in various forms, right? So as a distributor, as a manufacturer, right? And then now as maybe some markets we are yet at a distributor, manufacturer, both, right? So these three markets are the markets where we continue to dominate. And so we will keep that, we will maintain that position. So those are cash cows. Then we are in Africa, now in New Zealand, then very soon in Australia, and then maybe in Southeast Asia, and further expand in Australia. So these markets, obviously there can be some ups and downs in some of these markets, but it will be shielded by our cash cows, right? Those markets. So in terms of currency fluctuation, and also you said certain economies, different things. So now what happens is, another interesting thing that we have done is, earlier we were only in emerging markets. If you take Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives, Kenya, to a lesser extent India, all of these are emerging markets. So when there is a global issue, right, or pandemic, or some sort of a economic downturn, the emerging markets get affected first. But now all of a sudden, we are in New Zealand, which is a developed country. We are about to go into Australia, again, which is a developed country. So it is now we are getting a nice balance of emerging markets and developed markets, right? So sometimes when emerging markets struggle, the developed markets can hold. So we have, I would say, we have spread the risk now in terms of the economy, right? In terms of currency fluctuations, so we, unlike other companies, we are operating in those domestic markets. We are not manufacturing in Bangladesh and exporting to US. We are manufacturing in Bangladesh and we are selling in Bangladesh. We are manufacturing in New Zealand and we are selling in New Zealand. So we are a part of those local economies. So then, if you take our revenue, now we are getting revenue in Sri Lankan rupees. We are recognizing revenue in Taka, that is Bangladesh. We are recognizing in New Zealand dollars, and at one point we'll recognize in Australian dollars, right? So now we are selling in Kenya, that is Kenyan shillings. So we have also sort of spread the risk to multiple currencies, right? So again, if one currency goes down, it's against the other currency, right? So with that, and if you look at our percentage of revenue, right now we have foreign denominated revenue, the percentage is around 30 to 35%. With the Miraton acquisition, we will in the next 2 years make it up to about 50%. So we have 50% which we are in local currency, 50% in foreign currency. So that's how I think we are, I would say we are in an excellent position to face any sort of situation in that sense.
I would also like to touch on the acquisition with Miraton once again. How will JAT use this acquisition to elevate product innovation, sustainability standards, and customer experience across both existing and new markets? I know you answered certain aspects.
But something I think which I can add on to that is, again, now we have first-hand experience from Australia and from New Zealand, which we did not have earlier. What we would do is, we would think of it here, we would do some research there, we would maybe go there, visit, and then we would do our innovation, sustainability and all of that. But now, all of a sudden, we have a industrial customer base which we have one-on-one contact in New Zealand. And we will very soon build that in Australia. So we would know their wants, we would know what they are doing for sustainability. We would know what product we would need to develop in order to help them to achieve their goals, right? So what I'm trying to say is, the difference now is, I have first-hand info into these markets, a window that I can see, right? So with that, I think, like I told you, we are very dynamic. So once I get that information, it's for us to quickly adapt and to develop certain things and to push it into that market. Now that also creates an advantage, another question that you asked me earlier, right? But this combination, right? So I don't need to send people there now, nothing like that. On a daily basis, I get information. So I think that would be, I think, the answer to your question there.
And I've also arrived at my final question. Looking ahead, what does success look like for JAT Holdings 2 years from now, financially, operationally, and in terms of global brand presence?
Yeah, so I would like to rephrase that a little bit, 2 to 3 years from now. Yeah. So 2 to 3 years from now, like I said, I would look at our revenue almost increasing by about 2.5 times. Okay. 2.5 times. Our profitability to increase again by about about 2 times, or maybe even 2.5, right? So financially that, and our revenue to be 50% foreign denominated, right, through this. So those would be in the next 2 to 3 years from a financial perspective. That would be it. From a company sort of perspective and a qualitative part, right? I would look at JAT Holdings being in the forefront of the wood coating industry. Now, already in South Asia, yes, but also in New Zealand and Australia, in that continent, and expanding in Africa, right, in that part. So we would be in 3 years' time a strong player in 3 continents is something which I am looking at, right? And from a global expansion point of view, like I told you, 8 countries to 20 countries, right? And have a fair amount of multinational staff, right? So we have now a certain amount of staff from New Zealand. We will have certain amount of staff from Australia. We already have about 80 staff from Bangladesh, a certain amount of staff in Kenya, right? So it is more than a Sri Lankan company, right? With all of these human resource coming together, right? So I would look at us thinking like a multinational, right, and acting like a multinational. And in 3 years, if we could say that we are on track to be a true Sri Lankan multinational, right, and maybe the first true Sri Lankan multinational operating in multiple economies, right, not just exporting, okay, but operating in these foreign economies, setting up operations there and building those economies as well. I would say that would be extremely pleasing, and that would be the sort of the sign that we have achieved a certain amount of success.
And before we conclude today's episode, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I would like to say is, as a Sri Lankan company, right, always as a nation, maybe as individuals, we always fail to dream. Okay, we think that we are confined into this small island, right? Not everyone, but most of us are confined into this island, and our dreams are sort of short lived. Plus, I think most of the young individuals or young professionals, sometimes their dream only exists to migrate, right? But I think we are showing people that you could live in Sri Lanka, you could be a Sri Lankan company, you could dream big, and that you could take on the world. So I would like to say that if we believe, right, we have a long journey ahead, but at least in this company you have Sri Lankans who believe that they can take on the world, right? And I would say that is something that I would like to portray, or maybe the message to go out there, because there should be more Sri Lankan companies dreaming of being multinationals, and not multinationals for the name sake, right? The true multinational status, and that's what JAT is really striving to achieve.
Thank you for those comprehensive responses along with outlining JAT's plans for the future. It was a pleasure listening to JAT's growth and stance as a 100% Sri Lankan brand. With that said, we'd like to conclude this week's episode, so I urge you to stay tuned with us on our social media platforms and keep your eyes peeled out for for the Morning Money's Money Minds.